We recently concluded our first international major tournament since Fade was introduced to Valorant. And let's just say it didn't take very long for professional players to figure out how effective she is as an agent. If you guys have been watching this channel for a while, then you guys would know that I was a little bit hesitant to see how effective Fade would be at replacing Sova. But oh boy, she has completely replaced Sova on almost every map in Valorant. And in this video, we're going to talk about how pro players are using this agent to set up their team for success. To start things off, we need to talk about Fade's overall pick rate and what maps she works best on. Now, Fade was one of only 3 agents in all of Valorant that didn't have a single map with a 0% pick rate throughout all of Masters 2 in Copenhagen. The only other 2 agents were Chamber and KO. And Fade's pick rate across all maps was a staggering 52%, which is the 3rd highest of any agent in the game, only behind Chamber and Raze. To break down the individual maps, Fade's highest pick rate was on Ascent, which was 91%. We then have Bind, Haven, Split, and Icebox, who all come in at 50%, Fracture that comes in at 35%, and last but not least Breeze that comes in at 20%. Now, of course, Pearl wasn't included in the map pool at Masters 2 in Copenhagen, but I suspect that Fade will have a super high pick rate on Pearl as well. There are only 2 maps in all of Valorant where Fade hasn't replaced Sova as the primary information initiator. And those 2 maps are Breeze, where Sova still has an 80% pick rate, and Icebox, where Sova still has a 50% pick rate. And with Fade and Sova both having 50% pick rates on Icebox, you might be wondering what information initiator is better for you in your ranked games. And don't get me wrong, I think Fade gets quite a bit of value on Icebox and pro play, but you have to be so coordinated with your team to play off of your prowlers in the right way in order to justify replacing those prowlers with Sova's drone before you peek into any operator angles. And because you need such coordination with your team, I find that Sova is much better for ranked play when it comes to Icebox. Apart from that though, it's time to learn Fade on all the other maps in Valorant, as she is one of the most broken agents in the game right now. So let's dive into some pro play to see exactly how you can start to excel on Fade. To start things off, we'll talk about how pros attack with Fade, and we'll be taking a look at the match between Fnatic and Leviathan that went on during Masters 2 in Copenhagen. Fade players should always be using their prowlers to clear the very close angles at the first major choke point that your team can be peeking to into a round. This is very similar to how you would be using Sova's drone or Skye's dog. But the great thing about Fade is that she gets 2 of them. So as Enzo uses the first prowler to push this Astra off of A main, this gives Fnatic the entire control of this choke point. But as I mentioned, he has a whole nother prowler to use here to clear the close corners on the site. This is a perfect example about how you can use your prowler to take map control and also clear those very ratty close angles. Realistically, a player should never be peeking without initiating with a prowler or something like this first when you're going in for a site execute. After the Astra for Leviathan gets blinded, Enzo then throws his Haunt ability via a rooftop lineup that lands on the top of Tree Room. So to combine with all of the utility that was just used on this defending Astra, he's also getting scanned by the Haunt ability, so Fnatic is perfectly aware of his positioning. From here, Fnatic uses a great Sage Wall to block off the left side of site so they can isolate this one player who's been blinded by the prowler and again scanned by the Haunt ability. And this overall leads to a very clean site execute by Fnatic. As I mentioned here, Enzo had so much success with this rooftop lineup, but the reality of Fade's Haunt ability is that it's super easy to break. So that's why having these lineups that land in uncommon spots like rooftops are really important to have in order to get any sort of scan off on your defenders. Not only that, but if you can combine the timing of your Haunt ability with a flash from one of your teammates, then it's going to make the Haunt ability so much harder to break since the enemies who are defending the site are going to be blinded in the first place. And we'll take a look at a great example of that when we talk about how we can actually defend with Fade. The moral of the story for attack: lead with your prowlers, learn some unpredictable lineups, and as always, the most important thing as any initiator is to time your utility properly when your team plans to execute. Before we continue on with the video, about 95% of my viewers in the last 30 days are not subscribed to the channel. So please, if you're enjoying the content, click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you know every single time I post a video. And if you ever want to catch me live, I stream Tuesday through Saturday on Twitch as I'm currently climbing through the depths of Immortal and making a hard push for Radiant. We're currently at Immortal 2 and we've been absolutely climbing lately, so all the support toward the live stream is always appreciated. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. As we talk about defending with Fade, this is where we can talk a little bit more about her Seize ability. This 200 credit ability is insanely useful at stopping rushes and absolutely stopping enemies in their tracks. As we look at this pistol round from the same match between Fnatic and Leviathan, I want you to remember what I just talked about during attack, about how you can combine utility really well between agents and Fade. And that same thing can be said here on the defensive end with Fade's Seize ability. Not only does it stop all the enemies in their tracks, but it also decays their health, meaning that combining utility with something like a Sova shock dart or a Raze grenade not only slows down a rush, but often leads to free kills. And look at this prime example of that from Leviathan with the Seize ability combined with shock darts.
Here comes the Fnatic going for the big pop. Yep, bit of pace now behind this one. What is that?
So yes, use your C's ability where you feel like you need to retain the most map control. Sometimes that could be taking aggression in A main or B main on the defensive side to help retain that map control. And other times, as we saw with this example, it could be throwing the ability as the enemy team plans to explode out of a choke point. Fade players can also use their prowlers and their haunt ability early on in a round to get information on where the enemy team may be playing. For example, if you're playing B main on Ascent, you can send a prowler through B main, and if it latches on to anyone, then that's information that you can relay to your team as you make your mid-round adjustments. But one area where I feel like Fade is the most useful is when you're retaking a site. Again, remember when I talked about combining utility with Fade? Well, as we take a look at Fnatic's retake of A site on Ascent, this is a perfect example of it. To start things off, you'll see Mystic, who's the KO for Fnatic, pop flash out of heaven at the same exact time that Enzo throws his haunt ability on top of the rooftop here. And this goes hand in hand with exactly what I said on the attacking side. Because Mystic's pop flash blinds the opponents, they're not in a position where they can break the haunt ability. And if they can't break the haunt ability, then it's going to reveal exactly where the attacking players are holding when trying to defend the retake. The haunt scan leads to a wallbang kill on King, the KO for Leviathan, and overall just leads to a perfectly clean retake because they have so much information on where the attacking team are playing when trying to hold down the site. I want to take a look at one more beautiful example of combining utility on the defensive end. This is from the same exact round that we looked at earlier, where we talked about Fnatic's beautiful site execute using Enzo's prowlers and haunt scan that land on the rooftop on A site. Well, after they take control of site, we see a beautiful C's lineup from Shy, who's the Fade player playing in tree for the retaking team in Leviathan. He throws his C's ability toward the default plant, and this beautifully sets up Adverso to get a kill with his Sova ultimate. Because the C's ability limits players' ability to move, it makes this a perfectly free kill for Adverso and his ultimate. And this is just one more perfect example about how you can use Fade's utility to set up your teammates and combine utility for absolutely free kills. Lastly, we have to talk about Fade's ultimate ability and when you can have the most success with this. Of course, on attack, the radius is so big on this that it's really just useful to use when you're sending a full-on site execute with your team. Not only do you get the trail on the ground that reveals exactly where the enemies are playing, but they're also completely deafened and decayed all the way to half health. So there's not really too much to talk about here with using Fade's ult on attack. But one thing that I find that has a lot of success with Fade's ult when it comes to retaking a site on the defensive side is ulting and retaking very quickly so that the planting team can't get set up for their post plant. And that's perfectly shown here by Fnatic as they're ulting and retaking the site before the spike is even planted by Leviathan in the first place.
It's essentially a one round for them, but Shy's still watching at mid. Catching the angle onto post, it's a fast play straight in with the Nightfall. No more sound cues, and Fnatic, they clean up the players. Watching it down, they knew exactly where Shy's positioning was.
Fade is really starting to show her strength in the current Valorant meta. And I know a lot of you guys out there are still catering towards Sova in your ranked games, but I think it's time that we put the Sova aside and start to show respect where respect is due. Fade is one of the strongest agents in Valorant right now, and hopefully this video gave you an insight on how you can have more success with her in your ranked game. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching.